If someone had told me a year ago that the worst flu of my life would be the best thing that ever happened to me, I would have told them they were insane. Probably with a great deal of coughing and a voice thick with phlegm. But life, I've learned, has a penchant for irony. My life, before Julian, was a carefully curated collection of quiet routines. I worked from home, a graphic designer hunched over a glowing screen, shaping logos and branding guides for companies I'd never visit. My apartment was my sanctuary and my fortress. Books were stacked in tidy, precarious towers. The coffee maker gurgled to life at 7 in the morning, every morning. The silence was a comfortable blanket I wrapped myself in, punctuated only by the click of my mouse and the low hum of the refrigerator. It was a solitary existence, but it was mine. It was safe. And then there was Julian. Julian, who lived 3 floors above me in the same worn-down apartment building. Julian, who worked construction and came home covered in a fine layer of dust that seemed to cling to him like gold leaf in the evening sun. He was a force of nature, a disruption to my quiet frequency. His boots were heavy on the stairs. His voice was a low rumble in the hallway when he talked on the phone. His laughter was a thing that could shake the very foundations of my carefully built peace. From my window I watched him. I watched him unload groceries from his beaten-up truck, the muscles in his back and arms shifting under his worn t-shirts. I watched him lean against the railing of his own balcony, a beer in his hand, staring out at the city lights, with a look I couldn't quite decipher. It was a mixture of exhaustion and a deep, resonant loneliness that I recognized because I saw it in my own reflection. He was, to put it mildly, everything I was not. Confident, physically present in a way that seemed to take up more space than he actually occupied. He was loud and solid and real, and I was a ghost in my own apartment. We became friends in the way people in apartment buildings do. A series of small, accidental collisions. A shared struggle with a jammed lock on the main door. Him helping me carry a ridiculously oversized package that contained a new ergonomic chair. Me offering him a spare set of batteries for his smoke detector, which had chosen to die at 3 in the morning with a series of ear-splitting chirps. Soon it was beers on a Friday night. Sometimes at his place, which was sparse and masculine, and smelled faintly of sawdust and clean laundry. Sometimes at mine, where he'd look at my towers of books with a kind of amused respect. He was my friend. My best friend, if I was being honest. And I was hopelessly, secretly, devastatingly in love with him. It was a quiet, aching thing. A constant hum beneath the surface of my skin. I knew the score. He was straight. He talked about women, about bad dates, about the pretty barista at the coffee shop down the street. Each mention was a small, sharp pinprick to the heart, a reminder of the vast, uncrossable gulf between us. So I built walls. I kept my distance, even when he was sitting right next to me on my couch. I learned to control my breathing when his arm brushed against mine. I perfected a mask of casual friendship, a carefully constructed facade that I hoped hid the frantic, desperate thing beating in my chest. This was our status quo, this delicate, painful dance of proximity and distance. And then I got sick. It started as a tickle in my throat, a weariness I chalked up to a looming deadline. By the next morning, it was a full-blown assault. My head was a pressurized cabin, my body a battlefield of aches and chills. The world had narrowed to the confines of my bed, the tangled sheets, the sweat-damp pillow. My carefully constructed routine shattered into a million feverish pieces. I canceled my work. I ignored my emails. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, a distant, irritating sound. I let it go to voicemail, It was Julian. Of course it was Julian. "Leo? You alive in there? We were supposed to grab a beer. Text me back, man." I managed to tap out a garbled reply. "Sick, plague, stay away." His response was almost immediate. On my way down. Panic, cold and sharp, cut through the fever haze. "No, don't. Contagious." The reply was just 2 words. Too late. A few minutes later, there was a heavy knock on my door. A knock that sounded like Julian. Solid, unyielding. I dragged myself out of bed, my body protesting every movement. The floor was cold against my bare feet. The short walk to the door felt like a marathon. I fumbled with the lock and pulled the door open a crack, peering out. He was standing there, a plastic grocery bag in one hand, his brow furrowed with genuine concern. His presence was overwhelming. Too big, too healthy, too vibrant for my sick room. "You look like hell," he said. It wasn't an insult. It was a statement of fact, delivered with a startling gentleness. "Told you," I croaked, my throat feeling like sandpaper. "Go away, Julian. You'll catch it." He just shook his head, a small, wry smile playing on his lips. He nudged the door open with his shoulder and stepped inside, bringing the scent of the cold night air and something that was just him. Soap and sawdust. "My immune system could fight off a grizzly bear," he said, setting the bag on my small kitchen counter. "Now go get back in bed. You look like you're about to fall over." He was right. The world was starting to tilt on its axis. I stumbled back to my bedroom, collapsing onto the mattress. The springs groaned in protest. I could hear him moving around in my apartment, the sound of cabinets opening and closing, the rush of water from the tap. It was an invasion, a breach of my fortress. But it was also strangely comforting. The silence I usually craved was, for the first time, filled with the presence of someone who cared. He appeared in the doorway a few minutes later, a tall glass of water in one hand and a couple of pills in the other. "What's that?" I mumbled into my pillow. "Ibuprofen, for the fever, and water. You're probably dehydrated." He walked over to the bed, his weight making the mattress dip as he sat on the edge. My heart did a frantic little flip-flop. Too close. He was too close. I could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Sit up," he commanded gently. I pushed myself up, my muscles screaming. He handed me the pills and the glass. My hand was shaking so badly that water sloshed over the rim. He didn't comment. He just waited patiently until I'd swallowed them. Then he took the glass from me, his fingers brushing against mine. It was like a jolt of electricity, a sudden, sharp shock that made every nerve ending in my body stand at attention. My breath hitched. Did he feel that? He must have. But his expression didn't change. He just set the glass on the nightstand. Then he reached out. His hand, large and warm and calloused from work, came to rest on my forehead, and my carefully constructed world just stopped. Time seemed to slow down, to stretch and warp around that single point of contact, his palm against my skin. It was the most profound physical touch I had experienced in years, a universe of sensation in one simple gesture. The rough texture of his skin, the surprising coolness of his palm against my feverish heat, the sheer weight of it, a solid, grounding presence. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. I'm sure he could feel the frantic pulse in my temple. I'm sure he knew. How could he not? "Damn, Leo," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through my skull. "You're burning up." He pulled his hand away, and the absence of it was a physical ache, a sudden, chilling cold. I watched him, my eyes wide. I was an open book, every desperate hidden feeling laid bare on the pages of my face. He stood up and went into my bathroom. I heard the faucet run again. He came back with a washcloth, wrung out and folded neatly. He sat back down on the edge of the bed and gently placed it on my forehead. The cool dampness was a relief, but it was nothing compared to the shock of his touch. "I'm staying the night," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a declaration. My mind reeled. "No," I managed to say, the word barely a whisper. "You can't. Your work. The couch is terrible." My excuses were feeble, transparent. "I'll take a day off," he said, his gaze steady and unwavering. "And I've slept in worse places than your couch. You need someone to make sure you don't, spontaneously combust." There was a hint of his usual humor, but his eyes were serious. Deadly serious. I saw something in them I hadn't seen before. Not just concern. Worry. Real, deep-seated worry. This confident, capable man was worried about me. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. It chipped away at the neat, clean lines I had drawn between us. It blurred the roles we played. He was no longer just the unattainable object of my affection. He was my caretaker. And I, the self-sufficient hermit, was utterly dependent on him. The power dynamic had shifted, tilted on an axis I didn't even know existed. I was too weak to argue, too tired. And if I'm being honest, a selfish, hopeful part of me didn't want to. "Okay," I whispered. The word felt like a surrender. He gave me a small, reassuring nod. "Get some sleep. I'll be on the couch if you need anything." He stood up and walked out, closing the bedroom door softly behind him. I lay there in the darkness, the cool cloth on my forehead, my body aching and my mind racing. The apartment was no longer silent. It was filled with the subtle sounds of his presence. The creak of the floorboards as he moved around the living room. The soft thud of a pillow being fluffed on the couch. The click of the television turning on. The volume kept respectfully low. He was here, in my space, in my fortress. And I had let him in. Sleep came in fits and starts, a restless sea of fever dreams and disjointed images. Sometime in the deep, dark hours of the night, I woke up shivering, a violent, bone-rattling chill that seized my entire body. My teeth chattered. I tried to pull the comforter tighter around me, but my limbs felt heavy and uncooperative. A low moan escaped my lips, an involuntary sound of pure misery. The bedroom door creaked open almost instantly. A dark silhouette stood in the doorway, framed by the faint blue light of the television from the living room. "Leo?" Julian's voice was thick with sleep, but sharp with alarm. He was across the room in 2 long strides. Hey, what's wrong?" Cold," I managed to chatter out. He swore softly under his breath. He felt my forehead again, his hand a familiar weight in the darkness. "You're still on fire. The fever must have spiked." He disappeared for a moment and came back with another blanket from my linen closet, a heavy wool one I rarely used. He spread it over me, tucking it in tightly around my shoulders, but I was still shaking. The chill was deep inside me, a core of ice that no blanket could touch. I could feel his hesitation in the darkness, a palpable tension in the air. Then I heard him moving, kicking off his shoes. My heart stopped. What is he doing? The other side of the mattress dipped. He was getting into my bed. He lay down on top of the covers, his body a long, solid line next to mine. He didn't touch me. Not at first. He just lay there, a barrier of blankets between us, his sheer presence a source of radiating heat. The shivering didn't stop. "This is not working," he muttered, his voice close to my ear. And then he moved again. He shifted, pulling back the covers, and slid in beside me, under the blankets, in my bed. My mind went completely blank. Every coherent thought evaporated, replaced by a roaring, deafening static. He was wearing a t-shirt and sweatpants, and I could feel the soft cotton against the thin fabric of my own pajamas. He was so warm, a human furnace. He hesitated for another heartbeat, and then he wrapped an arm around me, pulling me back against his chest. My head came to rest in the hollow of his shoulder. His chest was a solid wall against my back. His arm was a heavy, possessive weight around my torso. His legs tangled with mine. Every inch of my body was screaming. This was the reality of 100,000 secret fantasies. A dream I never, ever thought would come true, happening now in the feverish haze of a Tuesday night. "Just for the warmth," he whispered, his voice a low vibration against my ear. "Body heat. It'll help break the chills." He was rationalizing it. For me. For himself. I couldn't speak. I could only lie there, rigid with shock and a terrifying, soaring hope. Slowly, tentatively, the warmth began to seep into me. His heat was a tangible thing, chasing away the icy core of the chills. My shivering began to subside. My muscles, which had been clenched tight, started to relax. I let out a long, shuddering breath and sagged against him. It was a surrender. His arm tightened around me just for a second, a brief, involuntary squeeze. "Better?" he asked softly. I managed a small nod against his shoulder. "Good." We lay there in silence. The only sounds were the soft hum of the city outside my window and the impossibly loud, dual rhythm of our breathing. His breath was slow and steady against the back of my neck. Mine was still ragged, still catching in my throat. I could feel the steady, powerful beat of his heart against my back. Thump, 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 thump. It was the most comforting sound in the world. He smelled of sleep and soap and something uniquely Julian. I wanted to bottle that scent. I wanted to live inside this moment forever. I must have drifted off, because the next thing I knew, the pale, gray light of dawn was filtering through my blinds. I was still wrapped in his arms. Sometime during the night, we had shifted. I was now facing him, my face buried in his t-shirt, my hand resting on his chest. His arm was still around me, his hand resting on the small of my back. His other hand was tangled in my hair. His face was inches from mine, his expression soft and unguarded in sleep. I could see the faint stubble on his jaw, the tiny scar just above his eyebrow that I'd never noticed before. His lips were slightly parted, his breathing a soft, even puff of air against my cheek. He was beautiful, a raw, unpolished kind of beautiful that stole the breath from my lungs. The fever had broken. My head was clear for the first time in days. And with that clarity came a sharp, piercing awareness of the situation. This was not real. This was a product of circumstance, of sickness and pity, and a cold night. It meant nothing. It had to mean nothing. To think otherwise would be to invite a kind of heartbreak I wasn't sure I could survive. As if he could sense my thoughts, his eyes fluttered open. Blue eyes, sleepy and unfocused. They blinked a few times, and then they found mine. For a long moment, he just looked at me. There was no surprise, no alarm, just a quiet, searching gaze. The silence in the room became a physical weight, pressing down on my chest. My heart started its frantic bird dance again. I should move. I should pull away. I should make a joke, shatter the intensity of the moment. But I was paralyzed, trapped in the blue depths of his eyes. His gaze dropped to my lips, just for a second, but I saw it. The air crackled. The space between us became charged, electric. This is it. This is the moment where everything changes. "Leo," he breathed, my name a soft prayer on his lips. And then he leaned in. It was slow, excruciatingly slow, giving me every opportunity to pull away, to turn my head, to say no. I didn't. I met him halfway. His lips touched mine. It wasn't a frantic, passionate kiss. It was hesitant, questioning. It was a soft, gentle pressure, a silent conversation. His lips were warm and surprisingly soft. It was a kiss that tasted of sleep and confusion and a fragile, burgeoning hope. It lasted for only a few seconds, but it felt like a lifetime. When he pulled back, his eyes were wide, a storm of emotions swirling in their depths. Fear, wonder, disbelief. He started, his voice rough. He didn't finish. He didn't have to. I knew. I knew that something had just broken open. Something vast and terrifying and beautiful. Then, the confession came. But it wasn't the one I expected. I've wanted to do that for a long time, he whispered, his voice barely audible. The words hit me like a physical blow. My carefully constructed reality, the one where he was straight and I was the secret admirer, crumbled into dust. What? I breathed, the word getting lost in the space between us. A long time, he repeated, his gaze unwavering. I didn't know how. I didn't know if you... He trailed off, looking lost. This big, confident man. Lost. And scared. It was my turn to be brave. I reached up, my hand trembling slightly, and cupped his jaw. The stubble was rough against my palm. Me too, I whispered. The relief that washed over his face was a profound thing to witness. Like a man who had been holding his breath for years and could finally exhale. He leaned in and kissed me again. This time, it was different. There was no hesitation. It was deeper, more certain, a confirmation, a beginning. My hand moved from his jaw to the back of his neck, my fingers tangling in his short hair. His arm tightened around me, pulling me impossibly closer, until there was no space left between us at all. We were just a tangle of limbs and whispered confessions and the frantic, synchronized beating of two hearts. But then, as the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting bright stripes of light across the bed, a new feeling began to creep in. Reality. And with it, fear. Julian seemed to feel it too. He pulled back, a new tension in his body. He sat up, running a hand through his already messy hair. He wouldn't look at me. I should go, he said, his voice suddenly strained. The words were a bucket of ice water. Julian, I started, sitting up as well. No, I have to get to work. I'm already late. He was already out of bed, pulling on his shoes, his movements jerky and abrupt. He was building a wall, right before my eyes, a wall of practicality and excuses. Wait, I pleaded, my voice sounding weak and desperate even to my own ears. We should talk about this. He finally looked at me, and his expression was shuttered. The vulnerability from moments before was gone, replaced by a guarded, almost panicked look. There's nothing to talk about, he said, his tone flat. You were sick. Look, just get some rest, okay? And then he was gone. He walked out of my bedroom, grabbed his jacket from the living room, and a second later I heard my front door click shut. Silence descended, but it wasn't the comfortable silence I was used to. It was a hollow, ringing void, an absence. I sat there, in the middle of my rumpled bed, the sheets still holding the faint scent of him. The morning after anxiety hit me like a tidal wave, a vicious, churning sea of doubt and self-recrimination. What had I done? What had we done? It was a mistake, a fever-induced hallucination. He didn't mean it. I've wanted to do that for a long time. His words echoed in my head, but now they sounded like a lie, a moment of weakness, pity. He felt sorry for the sick, lonely guy downstairs. My stomach twisted into a painful knot. The joy and hope for moments before curdled into shame. I had ruined it. I had ruined our friendship, the one good, solid thing in my solitary life. I had pushed for something he wasn't ready for, something he didn't really want. I was a fool. I spent the rest of the day in a miserable limbo. I was physically better. The fever was gone. The aches had subsided to a dull throb. But emotionally, I was a wreck. I paced my apartment, from the window to the kitchen and back again. I checked my phone every 5 minutes. No calls, no texts. Just a vast, deafening silence from the man 3 floors above me. My old solitude, the one I had once cherished, now felt like a punishment. The quiet of my apartment was no longer peaceful. It was haunted by the ghost of his presence, by the memory of his warmth, by the lingering echo of his voice. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant siren, made me jump. I was waiting for a knock on the door that I knew wouldn't come. By evening, I had worked myself into a state of resigned despair. It was over. Whatever it was. I had to accept it. I had to figure out how to go back to the way things were. But how could I? How could I go back to casual beers and friendly conversation now that I knew what his lips felt like? Now that I knew what it felt like to be held by him? The thought was unbearable. Maybe I would have to move. The idea was drastic, but it felt like the only solution. A clean break, a new apartment, a new routine, a new fortress where the ghost of Julian couldn't find me. I was sitting on my couch, staring blankly at the dark television screen, when I heard it. Footsteps in the hall. Heavy, familiar footsteps. They stopped outside my door. My heart leapt into my throat. A long moment of silence, and then a knock. Soft, hesitant. Nothing like his usual confident rap. I didn't move. Maybe if I stayed quiet, he would go away. Maybe that would be for the best. Another knock. A little more insistent this time. Leo? Are you in there? Please. We need to talk. His voice was muffled by the door, but I could hear the strain in it. The vulnerability. Slowly, like an old man, I got to my feet. My legs felt unsteady. I walked to the door and rested my forehead against the cool wood. Go away, Julian, I said, my own voice sounding hollow. Please, Leo, don't shut me out. I'm an idiot. I panicked. His words were a crack in my carefully constructed wall of despair. I took a deep breath and opened the door. He was standing there, looking exhausted. He was still in his work clothes, his face smudged with dirt, his hair a mess. He looked like he'd been through hell. His eyes were filled with a desperate, pleading look that shattered my resolve. Can I come in? He asked quietly. I stepped aside, and he walked in. He didn't go to the couch. He just stood in the middle of my living room, looking lost and out of place. We stood there for a long moment, the silence stretching between us, thick with unspoken words. He was the one who broke it. I'm so sorry, he said, his voice raw. I shouldn't have run off like that. It was a coward's move. I just shook my head, unable to speak. I freaked out, he continued, running a hand over his face. This morning. It was everything I've been thinking about for months. And then it was real. And I didn't know what to do with it. My heart ached for him. For both of us. I thought you regretted it, I finally managed to say, the words tasting like ash. His head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock. Regret it? Leo, no. God, no. It was the most real thing that's happened to me in maybe ever. He took a step closer. All day at work, I couldn't think straight. All I could see was your face. All I could feel was you. I kept replaying it in my head. The way you looked at me, the way you felt in my arms. He was closing the distance between us, his eyes locked on mine. "This is new for me," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. I've never felt this way about a guy before. It scares the hell out of me." He was standing right in front of me now, close enough to touch. But the thought of not having you in my life, that scares me a hell of a lot more. And there it was. The truth. Raw and terrifying and beautiful. He was just as scared as I was. We were two people standing on the edge of a cliff, afraid to jump, but even more afraid to walk away. "It scares me too," I admitted, my voice trembling. A small sad smile touched his lips. "So what do we do?" he asked. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Maybe we just figure it out." He reached out then, not to kiss me, but to take my hand. He laced his fingers through mine, his calloused palm warm and solid against my own. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like an anchor in a storm. "Okay," he said, his voice firm with a newfound resolve. "Okay, we figure it out. Together." He squeezed my hand, and in that moment, I knew we would be okay. He stayed. We ordered pizza and ate it sitting on the floor of my living room, our backs against the couch. We talked for hours, about everything and nothing, about his confusion, his dawning realization that his feelings for me were more than just friendship, about my years of silent longing, my fear of rejection. It was a messy, honest, and utterly necessary conversation. Later, as we were cleaning up, he turned to me, a strange look on his face. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a single, worn key. "This is for my place," he said, pressing it into my palm. I want you to have it." I stared at the key, the cold metal, a heavy, significant weight in my hand. It was more than just a key. It was a promise, an invitation, a tangible symbol of his commitment. "Just in case," he added, a faint blush coloring his cheeks. "You know, for emergencies, or if you just want to be there." I closed my hand around it, my heart swelling with an emotion so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. "Thank you," I whispered. That night, he slept in my bed again. But this time, there was no fever, no chills. There was no hesitation. Just the two of us, tangled together in the quiet darkness, learning the new landscape of each other's bodies. It was slow and gentle and perfect. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee. For a panicked second, my mind flashed back to the day before. The empty apartment. The silence. But then I heard the soft clink of a mug against the counter. I got out of bed and walked into the kitchen. Julian was there, his back to me, wearing a pair of my gray sweatpants that were a little too short on him. He was humming softly to himself as he poured 2 mugs of coffee. He turned, saw me standing in the doorway, and a slow, beautiful smile spread across his face. "Morning," he said, his voice warm and easy. He walked over and handed me a mug. Then he leaned in and gave me a soft, lingering kiss that tasted of coffee and toothpaste. "How do you feel?" he asked, his eyes searching mine for any trace of doubt or fear. I took a sip of the coffee. It was perfect. I leaned against the counter, savoring the warmth of the mug in my hands, the comfortable domesticity of the moment. The morning sun was streaming through my kitchen window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. My apartment, my fortress of solitude, no longer felt empty. It felt full of warmth and light and the steady, comforting presence of the man standing beside me. I looked at him, at this unexpected, wonderful plot twist in the quiet story of my life. This man, who had bulldozed his way through my carefully constructed walls and shown me that I didn't have to be alone. He had disrupted my routine, shattered my peace, and in doing so, he had saved me from a life of quiet desperation. He had shown me what it was to be truly seen, truly known. I smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached my eyes. I feel, I said, my voice clear and steady, completely and utterly fine.